My mother stood up at my sister's engagement dinner and told the Kestrels I was the family disappointment, a woman going nowhere. She didn't know I'd inspected their headquarters last month or that their matriarch already knew my name. What happened next rewrote everything. Before we get back to today's story, I have some exciting news to share. We have officially launched a brand new channel called Tales Beneath Skin. Over there, we are dedicating our platform to bringing you the juiciest, most jaw-dropping Reddit drama stories on the internet. We're diving deep into wild family feuds, shocking relationship betrayals, and epic tales of petty revenge. But we don't just leave you hanging with a cliffhanger. We track down every single update, plot twist, and final resolution so you get the complete, satisfying story from start to finish. Grab your popcorn, because we are serving all the tea with full context, community reactions, and top-tier narration that brings the chaos to life. Make sure to subscribe to Tales Beneath Skin right now so you don't miss out. You'll find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag. Thank you for your continued support as we grow this community. Now, back to the story. The site walkthrough that Friday afternoon was supposed to be routine. A 12-story mixed-use development off the River District, a building I'd already assessed twice in preliminary phases, and today was the final structural sign-off before the acquisition papers moved to closing. I'd been doing this work for 11 years, and I could tell you within 30 seconds of stepping into a lobby whether a building had good bones or was hiding rot behind the drywall. This one had good bones. I remember the exact moment the day tilted. I was standing on the fourth-floor mechanical deck with my hard hat pushed back and my clipboard braced against my forearm, going down the punch list with the site foreman when my client rep handed me a fresh set of documents. "New signatory page," he said. "Buyer's counsel updated the acquisition entity this morning. Just need your final report addressed to the correct name." I glanced down at the paperwork, and I stopped. The acquiring entity was Kestrel Holdings, LLC, managing partner, Margaret Kestrel. Secondary signatory, Daniel Kestrel. I stood very still on that mechanical deck, the wind pulling at the edge of my report, and I read the names 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Daniel Kestrel, my sister's fiancé. Margaret Kestrel, the woman I was scheduled to meet in about 4 hours at a private engagement dinner in the hills above the city. The woman my mother had spent 6 weeks calling old money royalty, while informing every relative within earshot that Elise had, quote, finally landed the family somewhere impressive. I had never told my mother what I did for a living. Not really. She knew the word engineer and considered it an unflattering label, something she filed away next to unmarried and no children and still driving that same practical car. She'd once told an aunt at Christmas that I worked in buildings. That was the summary of my career, as far as she was concerned. Buildings. She had no idea that for the past 3 years, my firm had been the preferred structural consultancy for Kestrel Holdings' entire commercial acquisitions pipeline. She had no idea that Margaret Kestrel personally requested me on the difficult files. She had no idea that when Elise had first shown us Daniel's picture at Easter and my mother had gasped at the name, I had felt a very specific, very quiet lurch in my chest, and had said nothing. I said nothing because I didn't want to steal Elise's moment. I said nothing because I knew how my mother would spin it if she thought I had connections she could exploit. I said nothing because, in our family, my job was to be the disappointing older sister, and any evidence to the contrary was treated as a threat to the story. I finished the walkthrough. I signed the report. I drove home with the blueprint folder tucked into my leather satchel on the passenger seat, and I could feel it there, unmistakable, the corner of the folder pressing against the strap. My work. My real, actual work. The thing my mother had spent 34 years pretending was beneath the family. I showered. I put on the navy dress I'd bought specifically for this dinner, the one Elise had picked out with me because she'd said, gently, that Mom would notice if I showed up looking like I came from a job site. I did my hair. I put on my grandmother's small pearl earrings, the ones my mother had never seemed to notice I'd inherited. And I picked up the satchel to move my wallet to the small clutch Elise had left me. Then I paused, and I put the wallet back into the satchel. And I looped the satchel over my shoulder instead. I told myself I was being sentimental. I told myself I just wanted my phone and my keys somewhere familiar. That wasn't the truth, and some quiet part of me already knew it. The truth was that I wanted the weight of my work against my hip when I walked into that house. Because for the first time in my adult life, I had a suspicion that my mother was about to make a mistake she couldn't take back, and I wasn't going to be caught unarmed. The Kestrel's house sat at the end of a long private drive, low and stone and framed by white oaks. I'd been there twice before, once for a preliminary meeting 3 years ago, once for a portfolio review last spring. Margaret Kestrel had made me coffee both times, in the smaller kitchen off the library, and had asked after my mother once, politely, the way she asked after everyone. Tonight, when I stepped out of my car and looked up at that stone facade, I understood something I hadn't been ready to understand before. My mother had been carrying a lie into this family for 6 weeks, and tonight, without knowing it, she was about to hand-deliver that lie to the one person in the room who could see straight through it. Elise met me at the door. My little sister, 29, in a dove-gray dress with her hair pinned up the way our grandmother used to pin it, looking radiant and nervous and painfully young. She hugged me hard, and I felt her tremble. "Mom's already inside," she whispered against my shoulder. "She's Naomi, she's on one tonight. Please, please just let it go, whatever she says." "Elise," I pulled back and looked at her. What has she said already? Elise's eyes flickered. "She's just been making comments. About you. She keeps telling Margaret how proud she is of me, comparing." Like she can't help herself, she swallowed, "Please, it's one dinner." I nodded slowly. I looked past her into the warm honey light of the entry hall, and I could hear my mother's voice, the specific pitch she used in company, bright and performative, spilling from the sitting room. "Elise," I said quietly, "I need you to know something. Whatever happens tonight, I love you. That doesn't change. Do you understand?" She frowned at me. "Naomi, what?" "Just remember that." I squeezed her hand. "Now let's go in." The sitting room was full. Margaret Kestrel sat in a wingback chair by the window, silver-haired, unhurried, the kind of quiet presence that made people lower their voices without noticing. Daniel stood beside her, tall and easy, and his father, David Kestrel, was pouring drinks at a small sideboard. There was an aunt and uncle, a cousin, the inner circle. And on the couch, spine straight, chin lifted, sat my mother. Colleen Whitlock had dressed for war. Emerald green, pearls at her throat, her hair set. She saw me come in and her mouth tightened, that familiar microflinch she made whenever I entered a room where she was performing. Then she recovered and smiled and turned back to Margaret. "And here she is," my mother said brightly. "My eldest, Naomi. She works so hard, poor thing. She's always so tired from all that running around at construction sites, isn't it, dear?" Margaret Kestrel turned her head. Her eyes settled on me, and I watched something move behind them, recognition, then a very small, very private surprise. She did not, however, say a word. She simply inclined her head and said, "Naomi, welcome." "Margaret," I said, "it's lovely to see you." My mother's smile hitched, just a fraction. "Oh, do you too?" "Mrs. Kestrel and I have met at a few professional functions," I said mildly. "It's a small industry." Which was technically true, and which committed me to nothing further. My mother laughed too loud. "Professional functions, listen to her. She makes it sound so glamorous." She turned to Margaret conspiratorially. "She inspects buildings. It's terribly dirty work, actually. She's always covered in dust when she comes home." I keep telling her it's not too late to find something more suited to a woman her age. There was a small silence in the room. Elise looked at the floor. Daniel looked at his shoes. Margaret Kestrel did not react at all, which was, I had come to understand, her most powerful expression. I felt the strap of the satchel across my shoulder. I felt the folder inside it press against my hip. I could tell you the exact weight of that folder: 180 pages of engineering assessment, 2 structural reports, a sealed final letter, all signed by me and stamped with my professional license number that very afternoon. My work, my real work. pressing quietly against my ribs like a second heartbeat. Say nothing yet, I thought. Not yet. Let her. Mother, Elise said softly, Naomi's job is very impressive, actually. She. Oh, sweetheart, don't. My mother patted Elise's knee. Don't feel like you have to prop her up. Naomi is doing her best. Not everyone can be as lucky as you. She turned her smile back to Margaret. Elise is the shining light of our family, Margaret. I always knew she was destined for something bigger. Dinner was called. We moved into the dining room. My mother arranged herself directly across from Margaret. I sat beside Elise. Daniel sat at his mother's right hand. And through the soup course, through the salad, through the first glass of wine, I watched my mother do the thing she had spent 34 years perfecting. She minimized me in tiny, elegant increments. A comment about my hair. A comment about how I still hadn't settled down. A joke about how I'd always been the practical one, not the pretty one. A remark that Elise had gotten the family charm, thank goodness. Each one on its own was a paper cut. Together, they were a lifetime. I kept my hands folded in my lap. The satchel sat on the floor by my chair. I could feel it against my ankle. And then, halfway through the entree, my mother made the mistake. She turned to Margaret and said, Of course, dear, I've been so looking forward to seeing where Elise will fit into your world. I've told her, a woman marrying into a family like yours has to understand the finances. I've done a bit of my own reading, you know. Kestrel Holdings' development portfolio is really quite something. That project on the river, the mixed-use tower, that must be closing soon, mustn't it? The room went very still, because that project had not been publicly announced. The acquisition papers hadn't been filed. It wasn't in any newspaper, any trade publication, any social feed. There were exactly 2 ways my mother could have known that a River District tower was closing this month for Kestrel Holdings. One was that Elise had told her, and Elise didn't know Daniel wasn't involved in that side of the business. The other was that she had been digging, researching, reading things she had no business reading, looking up filings, checking property records, watching the family she was about to attach herself to like a stock she planned to buy into. Margaret Kestrel set down her fork. Slowly. Precisely. I don't recall discussing that project publicly, Margaret said. Her voice was perfectly polite. How interesting that you'd know about it. My mother laughed, and I heard the edge of panic in it. Oh, well, you know how these things travel. Elise mentions little bits and pieces. Elise doesn't know about that project, Daniel said quietly. Elise had gone pale beside me. I did not move. I did not speak. I let the silence stretch. I let my mother sit inside the moment she had made. And I felt the folder against my ankle, patient, waiting. To understand what happened in that dining room, you have to understand what happened before it. 34 years before it. I was 5 when Elise was born, and I remember being told, on the day my mother brought her home from the hospital, that I was to be the helper now. Not the sister. The helper. My mother said it with a bright kind of firmness, as if she were assigning me a job title, and in a very real sense she was. From that day forward, Elise was the sun the household orbited around, and I was the older, sturdier planet expected to keep her in her light. I don't say this bitterly. I don't say it to make you pity me. I say it because it is simply the shape of the family I grew up in, and because that shape had consequences. Elise got the piano lessons. I got told the family couldn't afford 2 sets. Elise got the dance recitals, the horse camp, the Sweet 16 party at the country club my mother strained the budget to book. I got told I was practical and given a used calculator and a subscription to a science magazine, both of which, in fairness, I loved, but which were framed always as consolation prizes. I paid for my own college. My mother told relatives I chose to be independent as if it had been a matter of personality, not necessity. I paid for my own graduate degree. I paid for the down payment on my condo in cash with money I'd saved through a decade of overtime. When I bought that condo, my mother came to see it once, looked around at the modest square footage and said, "Well, it's a start, I suppose. You'll want something bigger when you finally meet someone." I never met someone. I met several someones over the years, actually, and let each of them go because I was tired, and because I had built a life that fit me, and because the version of myself I would have had to become to satisfy my mother's ideas about womanhood was a version I no longer wanted to audition for. Elise, meanwhile, floated. She was warm. She was easy to love. She became a kindergarten teacher, which delighted my mother because it was a lovely job for a young woman, and she moved through her 20s with the buoyant confidence of a person who had never been told she was less. I don't hold that against her. Elise didn't build the world we grew up in. She just lived inside it. But over the years, my mother had done something quieter and more corrosive than favoritism. She had spent a decade slowly editing me out of Elise's life. Sunday dinners were scheduled on days she knew I traveled. Birthdays were planned in windows when I was on site. Family group chats mysteriously excluded me until I noticed and asked. When Elise called me, my mother would find reasons to interrupt, to redirect, to remind Elise that her older sister was so busy, don't bother her. The isolation had been so gradual that Elise had never seen it happening. She just knew that somehow, at some point, her big sister had become a person she saw twice a year. And then Daniel Kestrel had walked into Elise's life 6 months ago, and my mother had smelled opportunity, and every buried instinct in her had come screaming to the surface. She had spent 6 weeks, by my count, aggressively insinuating herself into every wedding conversation. She had suggested venues. She had suggested guest lists. She had, according to Elise, asked Daniel's parents twice already about family traditions around gifts to the bride's family. She had, without telling anyone, apparently been reading up on Kestrel Holdings' business operations. She thought she was preparing. She thought she was being strategic. She thought she was, at last, arriving at the version of life she felt she had always deserved. She did not know that her elder daughter, the disappointment, the one who worked in dust, had been quietly, professionally, embedded in the Kestrel family's business dealings for 3 years. She did not know that Margaret Kestrel had, only 2 weeks ago, sent me a handwritten card thanking me for saving the firm a very large amount of money by catching a structural defect on a property they had almost purchased. That card was in the top drawer of my desk at home. It read, in Margaret's small, careful handwriting, "Naomi, your integrity is a rare thing. Thank you." MK, she did not know that the person she was performing for tonight, the matriarch she was trying so hard to impress, already had a settled and specific opinion of the Whitlock family's elder daughter. And it was not the opinion my mother had spent 34 years constructing. Back in the dining room, in the silence after Daniel's quiet correction, my mother's smile was still fixed in place, but her eyes had gone glassy the way they did when she was calculating an escape. "Well," she said, with a small, brittle laugh, "I must have misheard something Elise said. You know how mothers are. We pay too much attention." She reached for her wine glass. Her hand was not quite steady. Margaret Kestrel looked, for the first time all evening, directly at me. It was a brief look. A single second, perhaps, but in it I read something I had not expected, a question. She was asking me, without asking me, whether I intended to let this continue. I met her eyes, and I gave the smallest possible shake of my head. "Not yet," I told her silently. "Let me choose the moment." She understood. She turned back to my mother and said with perfect grace, "Of course. It's easy to get details mixed up. Shall we move on to dessert?" My mother exhaled. Visibly, she thought she had survived it. She had not survived it. She had merely been granted a few more minutes to keep talking her way deeper into the hole she was standing in. And beside my chair, the blueprint folder in my satchel pressed against my ankle, patient as a held breath, waiting for me to decide when to stand up. Dessert was a lemon tart with candied ginger. I remember that clearly, because I remember watching my mother push it around her plate and pretend to enjoy it. And I remember thinking, with a strange and unfamiliar calm, this is the last dinner where you get to run the room. The conversation had moved, mercifully, to safer ground. Margaret was asking Elise about her kindergarten class. Daniel was refilling water glasses. My mother was recovering her composure in visible increments, the color returning to her cheeks, her voice retuning itself to the bright social register she preferred. She thought the awkwardness of the River District comment had been smoothed over. She thought she'd been handed a reprieve. She began, of course, to press her luck. "You know, Margaret," she said, leaning in, "one thing I've always believed is that when families come together, it's so important for everyone to understand their role. Elise is going to need guidance. She's tender-hearted. She'll need someone to help her adjust to a lifestyle she isn't used to." Margaret Kestrel folded her napkin. "Elise strikes me as a very capable young woman." "Oh, she is. My mother waved a hand. "But you know, some of us in the family are simply better positioned to help her navigate certain things. Naomi, God love her, has always been in her own little world, but I've made it my mission to be present, to be involved. Whatever the family needs from me, Margaret, I want you to know I am here." I set my dessert fork down, very gently. It made almost no sound. "Mother," I said. She turned, startled, as if she had genuinely forgotten I was at the table. "I think there's something you should know before you continue," I said. My voice was quiet, conversational. The kind of voice I used on job sites when I had to tell a foreman his beam calculations were wrong. About my work. My mother's mouth thinned. "Naomi, sweetheart, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time." I turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Kestrel, my mother has been under the impression for many years that I inspect buildings in the general sense, that I do site labor. She's mentioned it in front of you tonight several times. I'd like to correct the record, if I may." Margaret Kestrel inclined her head, the smallest permission. "I'm a licensed structural engineer," I said, and my voice did not shake. "I hold a professional engineering license in the state and 2 others. I'm a senior associate at Haverson and Reed, and for the last 3 years, I've been the lead structural consultant on Kestrel Holdings' commercial acquisitions portfolio. I signed the final structural report on the River District Tower this afternoon, which is why I know exactly when it's closing, and why it wasn't public." The room went absolutely still. My mother's face did something I had never seen it do before. It emptied. All the practiced expressions she wore in company, the bright smile, the maternal warmth, the gently suffering matron look, all of them fell away at once, and for a single unguarded second I saw her actual face. Frightened, furious, small. That isn't," she began. "It is," I said. "I have my license number and my report signature on file with Kestrel Holdings' legal team. Mrs. Kestrel has personally requested me on files for the last 2 years." Margaret spoke then, for the first time in several minutes. "Naomi caught a foundation defect on the Ridgeway property last spring that would have cost us 7 figures to remediate. I sent her a note of thanks. She has been a trusted professional to this family for some time." My mother stared at her. She stared at me. Her mouth opened and then closed and then opened again. "Why," she said, and her voice was thin, "why didn't you tell me?" I looked at her across that beautiful table, in that beautiful house, and I felt something I had been carrying for 34 years finally shift, an old weight sliding from one side of my chest to the other, and settling somewhere I could bear it. "Because you never asked," I said. "In 11 years, Mother, you have never once asked me what I actually do." There is a particular sound a person makes when their internal narrative collapses in real time. It isn't a gasp. It's more like a small, wounded exhale, the sound of a story that had been holding a person upright, suddenly giving way underneath them. My mother made that sound. I heard it clearly. And then, because she was who she was, she reached for the only tool she had ever learned to use in a moment of loss of control. She attacked. Well, her laugh was sharp and wrong. "Isn't this convenient? Isn't this just, how long, Naomi? How long have you been sitting on this? Letting your sister date this man, letting me have conversations with these people, and you never once thought to mention." "I mentioned my job," I said. "I have mentioned my job at every family gathering for 11 years. You have consistently changed the subject." "Oh, don't you dare?" Her voice rose. "Don't you dare rewrite history at my daughter's engagement dinner. Don't you dare embarrass me." "Mother," Elise said very softly, "please." But Colleen Whitlock was past listening. She had spent an evening being subtly, then not so subtly, disassembled, and every instinct she possessed was telling her that if she just raised her voice enough, if she just seized the narrative back with enough force, she could still salvage the room. You have always been like this. She turned on me full body now, her chair scraping. Always, sneaking, withholding, making the rest of us look foolish so you can have your little private victory. Do you know what your sister has given up to keep the peace between us? Do you have any idea? Mother, stop. Elise's voice was louder now. She was crying quietly without moving. Please stop, please. I will not stop, Elise, because someone in this family has to be honest. You are talking about honesty. The words came out of me before I'd chosen to say them. You have spent a decade cutting me out of my own sister's life, rescheduling dinners when I traveled, telling her not to bother me, convincing her slowly that we weren't close because I didn't want to be. That was you. That was all you. Elise's head snapped toward me. What? Ask her, I said. Ask her about the birthday you had in April 3 years ago that I found out about a week later because it was scheduled on a day I'd been on site in Denver, a trip that had been on the family calendar for 2 months. Ask her about the Thanksgiving I wasn't invited to because she'd told you I had plans. I didn't have plans, Elise. I was home. I waited for a call. That isn't, my mother started. Ask her, I said again, and I did not raise my voice. Elise looked at our mother, and I watched, in real time, 29 years of assumed truth begin to crack down the middle of my sister's face. Mom, Elise whispered. Our mother did not answer. She did the thing she always did when cornered. She pivoted to injury. Her eyes filled. Her hand went to her chest. I cannot believe, she said, her voice trembling now with a very theatrical grief, that on the night of your engagement, your sister would choose to attack me like this. In front of your future family. Margaret, I am so sorry you're witnessing this. Naomi has always been jealous of Elise. She has always resented. Colleen, Margaret Kestrel's voice was quiet, but it had a floor of iron under it. I don't think that framing is going to help you here. My mother stared at her. I have known Naomi professionally for 3 years, Margaret continued evenly. I have watched her decline to name-drop this family on more than one occasion when it would have benefited her. She has never mentioned that her sister was dating my son. She has never traded on our relationship. I did not know until tonight that you were her mother. She paused. I think, Colleen, you have badly misread the room you walked into. Silence. My mother's face did another one of those small collapses. But this time, underneath the anger, I saw something newer and uglier surface. The calculation of a person realizing that the audience she had come to perform for had turned into a jury. She stood up. Her chair scraped again, loud this time. I don't have to sit here, she said. I don't have to sit here and be humiliated by my own child. No, I said, you don't. She looked at me, and I saw her wait for me to soften, to rise, to do the thing I had done 1,000 times before, which was to talk her back down from her exit, to smooth the moment, to hand her back her dignity so we could all continue pretending. I did not move. She turned to Elise. Are you coming? Elise did not lift her head. She was still crying, and her hands were folded very tightly on the tablecloth, and she said, in a voice so small I almost didn't hear it, No, Mom, I'm going to stay. My mother stood there for one more second, waiting for the world to right itself. And then, because it did not, she walked out of the Kestrels' dining room alone. After my mother left, no one spoke for a long moment. Then Margaret Kestrel quietly asked her husband to see if the driver could bring the car around. She excused herself to the library to give the family a moment. Daniel took Elise's hand and led her to the sitting room, and I sat alone at the table with a lemon tart I had not touched, and I felt my satchel against my ankle, and I let myself breathe. I want to tell you that what came next was clean. It wasn't. It rarely is. Elise called me the next morning at 7. She had not slept. Neither had I. She asked me to come to her apartment, and when I got there, she was sitting on the floor of her living room in yesterday's dress with her hair still pinned up, and she had a spiral notebook open in her lap and a pen in her hand, and she said, without looking up, I need you to tell me all of it. Everything she did. I need to write it down, because I don't trust my own memory right now. So I told her. I told her about the birthdays. I told her about the group chats I had discovered I'd been removed from. I told her about the Christmas 7 years ago when our mother had told me the family gathering was canceled, and I had spent the day alone and had learned 3 months later from a cousin that the gathering had happened without me. I told her about the college graduation my mother had forgotten to attend because Elise had a dance recital the same afternoon. I told her about the hospital stay after my appendectomy, when my mother had visited once for 11 minutes and had spent 9 of those minutes talking about Elise's new boyfriend. I did not embellish. I did not perform. I simply told her, and she wrote it down, and every so often she stopped writing and pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth and cried without sound, and then picked up the pen again. "There's more," she said eventually, and her voice was hoarse. "There's Naomi, there's something I need to tell you." She got up, she went to the small desk by the window. She came back with a folder, a real folder, not a satchel blueprint folder, a plain manila one, and she set it on the coffee table between us. "She's been researching Daniel's family," Elise said. "I found this in her guest room last month. She left it there after she stayed over. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't want to believe it." I opened the folder. Inside were printouts, public records, property filings, a printed screenshot of Kestrel Holdings' organizational chart from a business publication, a page of handwritten notes in my mother's careful cursive, breaking down what she believed the family's net worth to be. A list of dates, I recognized them after a moment, as the projected timelines for 2 development projects that were, at that point, still in confidential due diligence. And at the back, most damning of all, a printed email chain. 2 emails, both from my mother. Both sent, apparently, to a woman I didn't recognize, whose signature line identified her as a family lifestyle consultant based in the city. The first email described Elise's engagement and asked the consultant, in blunt terms, how a mother could position herself within an established family to maximize her influence over gift structures, wedding-related transfers, and long-term family financial planning. The second email, sent a week later, asked whether it was possible to arrange for Elise's older sister to be gently kept out of the wedding planning process, because she was unstable and jealous and likely to interfere. I read that email twice. I set the folder down very carefully. "Elise," I said, "I know." She was crying again. "I know, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Naomi. I didn't know, She told me you didn't want to be involved in the planning. She told me you'd said the wedding stress would be too much for you with your job, Elise," I reached across and took her hands. "Stop, look at me, this is not your fault. She spent a very long time making sure you couldn't see it. That was her job, not yours." She nodded, eyes streaming. "But," I said, "we need to decide together what happens next, because she is going to call. She is going to apologize. She is going to cry. She is going to tell you that I have manipulated you. She is going to tell you that Margaret Kestrel is going to look down on you now because of what happened last night, and I need you to be ready for that." "She already called," Elise whispered. 6 times, I haven't picked up." "Okay," I squeezed her hands. "Okay, then here's what we're going to do." I walked her through it, slowly. The way I walked junior engineers through the process of documenting a structural failure. First, we made copies of the folder, 3 sets, one for Elise, one for me, one to be kept with a family attorney a colleague of mine had recommended. Second, we drafted a short, calm, unambiguous message that Elise would send to our mother, stating that she needed a period of no contact and that any wedding-related communication would go through Daniel or through me. Third, and this was the part that took the longest, we talked about what Elise actually wanted from a relationship with our mother going forward, and whether such a relationship was even possible on honest terms. She didn't have an answer. She didn't need to have one that morning. That was the point. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was Margaret Kestrel. A single line, "When you and your sister are ready, I would like to have you both to the house for coffee. No family, just the 3 of us, whenever suits." I showed the message to Elise. She read it, and for the first time that morning, something in her face softened, and I saw a glimpse of the sister I had always known was underneath the family my mother had built around her. "She's kind," Elise said quietly. "Yes," I said, "she is." That afternoon, my mother called me. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let it go to voicemail. On the third call, I picked up because I knew that if I didn't, she would show up at my condo, and I preferred to conduct this conversation from a distance. "Naomi." Her voice was strained but composed. "We need to talk. What happened last night was a misunderstanding, and I think if you'd let me explain." "Mother," I said, "I've seen the folder." There was a very long silence. "Elise found it," I said, "in your guest room. The one you left after you stayed over last month. The printouts, the notes, the email you sent to the lifestyle consultant asking how to keep me out of the wedding." The silence stretched. "That was," she began. "Don't." My voice was quiet. "Don't explain it, don't spin it. I am telling you this once so that you understand what happens next. Elise is not going to be speaking with you for a while. I am not going to be speaking with you for a while. Any wedding-related communication will go through Daniel or through me. If you attempt to contact Margaret Kestrel directly, I will let her know exactly what you sent to that consultant. And I promise you, Mother, she will not respond well." "You wouldn't." "I would," I said, "but I don't have to. Because you've already done the damage yourself." I hung up. I sat on my couch for a long time after that, with the folder on the coffee table in front of me and my satchel on the floor by my feet. The blueprint corner still poked out. I hadn't put it away yet. I looked at it, and I thought about the weight of it against my hip the night before, and I thought about the girl I had been at 5, being told she was the helper now, and I thought about the woman I had become, sitting quietly across a dinner table with her real life pressing against her ribs like a held breath. Some weights, I realized, you carry because they are heavy. Others, you carry because they are yours. The coffee at Margaret Kestrel's happened 11 days later, on a Sunday morning, in the small library off the kitchen where she had once made me coffee before a portfolio review. It was a room lined with books and one wide window that looked out over a walled garden, and there was a low table between 2 chairs and a settee, and Margaret had set out a French press and 3 cups and a plate of shortbread, and nothing else. No performance. No arrangement. Elise and I sat on the settee. Margaret sat across from us. She poured the coffee herself. "I want to say something first," Margaret said, "and then I want to listen for as long as either of you need." She set the press down. "Elise, I have watched you very carefully these last 6 months, and I want you to know that Daniel has chosen well, and that I am glad you are joining this family. Nothing about your mother's behavior changes that. I want you to hear me say it, because I suspect you have been afraid to ask." Elise's eyes filled, and she nodded, and she did not try to speak. "Naomi," Margaret turned to me, "I have known you as a professional for 3 years, and I have respected you the entire time. What I saw at that dinner did not surprise me about you. It confirmed things I had already suspected. I want to thank you for the restraint you showed. It cannot have been easy." I looked down at my coffee. It was and it wasn't. "I imagine so." She was quiet a moment. "I will tell you both, plainly, what I intend to do. Your mother will not be invited to Kestrel family gatherings. She may attend the wedding if Elise wishes her to and if she conducts herself appropriately. She will not be given access to family financial conversations, ever. And if she attempts to contact me directly, I will not respond. That is not a punishment. That is simply a boundary I have decided on for the safety of my family and for the peace of yours." Elise found her voice. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me for that." Margaret's tone was gentle. "Now, I would like, if you're willing, to hear from both of you what you would like this next season to look like, not just the wedding, the years after." And we talked for nearly 2 hours. About Elise, about Daniel, about what a family could look like when it was built on honest ground instead of managed narratives. About whether Elise wanted our mother at the wedding at all. She wasn't sure yet, and Margaret told her she didn't have to decide today, or next month, or even next season. About my work, which Margaret asked after specifically, in front of Elise, so that my sister could hear it named out loud, the shape of a career I had built without our mother's knowledge or approval. At one point, Elise turned to me on the settee and said, "I want to know about your job, all of it. I want you to tell me everything I've missed." I laughed a little. "Elise, that's 11 years of stories." "Then start at the beginning," she said, and she meant it. There was no confrontation in that library. There was no dramatic reveal, no raised voice, no shattered glass. My mother was not in the room, and she was never going to be in that room. That was the climax, really. That was the whole of it. 3 women, in a quiet library on a Sunday morning, deciding together what our lives would look like from that point on, without asking permission from the woman who had spent decades assuming she got to write the story. Somewhere across the city, my mother was making phone calls. To aunts, to cousins, to old family friends, trying to seed her version of events before ours could land. I knew she was doing it because 2 of my cousins had already texted me, careful and confused, asking if I was okay, and if it was true that I had caused a scene. I answered them honestly. I sent them, with Elise's permission, a short and factual summary, not the folder, not the emails, just the shape of what had happened, and I let them decide for themselves. Most of them decided quickly. The consequences did not arrive in a courtroom. They arrived instead in 100 small silences. Within a month, my mother's social circle had contracted in ways she had not anticipated. 2 of her closest friends, women who had known me since I was a child, and who had heard, over the years, my mother's steady stream of dismissive commentary about my life, quietly stopped returning her calls after they heard, from mutual acquaintances, what had happened at the Kestrels. Her sister, my Aunt Rowena, called her once and had a very long and, I understand, very direct conversation with her, at the end of which my aunt told her that she would not be attending any family event where I was not welcome. My cousins, the ones who had texted me, made their own quiet decisions. The family group chat, the one I had been slowly edited out of, gained me back as a member and lost her as its center of gravity. She was not exiled with fanfare. She was simply, slowly, no longer the person around whom the family arranged itself. And for a woman who had built her identity on being that person, I understood, it was a kind of ruin she felt every single day. She attended the wedding. Elise decided in the end that she wanted her there not out of forgiveness, but because Elise did not want to spend her wedding day defined by our mother's absence any more than she had spent her life defined by her presence. Our mother sat in the second row. She wore lavender. She did not give a speech. She did not approach Margaret Kestrel. She did not, as far as I could tell, approach anyone except a distant cousin who had not yet heard the story. She left before the dancing. I walked Elise down the aisle. She had asked me to, 3 weeks before the ceremony, over dinner at my condo, and she had cried a little when she asked, and I had cried a little when I said yes. Margaret sent us a photograph later that her husband had taken from the second row. It was the 2 of us at the top of the aisle just before I let go of Elise's arm. My sister was laughing. I was looking at her, not at the aisle, not at Daniel, not at the guests, just at her. My little sister, at last, in a moment that belonged to both of us. My mother and I have not spoken in 14 months as of the writing of this. I understand that she has, in recent months, begun telling a new version of events to anyone who will still listen, one in which I poisoned Elise against her, and Margaret Kestrel took my side unfairly. I understand that fewer and fewer people are listening. I understand that she has begun attending a different church, in a different suburb, where none of the story has yet arrived. I wish her, honestly, no active harm. I simply no longer arrange my life around the fear of her opinion of it. Elise and I talk almost every day. She calls me on her lunch break from school, and I tell her about job sites and beam calculations and the strange things I find in old buildings, and she tells me about the 5-year-olds in her classroom, and we are, at 35 and 30, finally becoming the sisters we should have been all along. It is slower than a reunion in a movie. It is quieter. It is real. Margaret Kestrel and I still work together. She still requests me on the difficult files. She sent me, last Christmas, A small silver bookmark engraved with a single line from a poem I had once, in a professional meeting years ago, quoted absent-mindedly. I keep it in the top drawer of my desk, next to her handwritten card. Two small objects. One family, restored in miniature. The satchel is still with me. The blueprint folder from that Friday afternoon has long since been filed away, but I still carry the same bag, and I still feel its weight against my hip when I walk into rooms where I am not certain I am welcome. It reminds me always of the night I learned that the life I had built without permission was the very life that would, in the end, set me free. Some weights you carry because they are heavy. Others you carry because they are yours. And a very few, the rarest kind, you carry because one day, without warning, they become the exact shape of the door you needed to open.